As generations passed, small groups of humans began to grow into something more: early tribes. No longer just scattered bands of survival, they developed the first signs of structure. Roles became clearer: hunters, gatherers, caretakers, and elders who carried the wisdom of many seasons. It was not yet civilization, but it was order, an instinctive organization born from necessity. Their journeys carried them across vast distances. Step by step, they followed rivers, crossed valleys, and climbed mountains, always searching for food, shelter, and safety. Some groups met others along these endless paths. Sometimes they exchanged knowledge, gestures, or companionship. Other times, fear and competition led to conflict. These encounters shaped them, teaching the first lessons of alliance and rivalry, of trust and caution. Nature remained their greatest teacher. The sky guided them, sun by day, stars by night. They learned that certain plants could heal, while others brought sickness. They observed the movements of animals, not only to hunt, but to understand the patterns of life itself. Slowly, a connection formed, not only of struggle against the world, but of belonging to it. They were beginning to see themselves as part of the land, bound to its cycles of birth, death, and renewal. In this bond with nature, symbols grew stronger. Paintings of hunts adorned cave walls, not only as memory, but perhaps as prayer. Stones were arranged in deliberate shapes. Fire pits became gathering places where stories carried the identity of the tribe. These were the earliest foundations of culture: shared memory, shared meaning, and the first threads of spirituality. Though still fragile and vulnerable, humanity was no longer drifting blindly through the Ice Age. They moved with purpose, with memory, with unity. Tribes became more than survival units. They became families, communities, the first sparks of what would one day become nations. The struggle was far from over, but humanity was changing. The Ice Age shaped their bodies, but the challenges of migration and unity were shaping their minds and their spirit. And in that spirit, the story of civilization was already beginning.
As the Great Ice Age slowly loosened its grip, the world began to change. Glaciers that had once swallowed valleys and mountains started to retreat, leaving behind fertile soil, rushing rivers, and vast new lands. Forests spread where tundra had once stretched endlessly, and herds of animals followed the fresh growth of grass across plains reborn from ice. For humanity, this was both opportunity and challenge. The old ways of constant migration began to shift. Where once survival meant endless wandering, now some groups discovered places rich enough to stay longer, valleys where rivers ran steady, plains where game was plentiful, and lands where plants grew in abundance. Here, the first seeds of a new life were sown. Humans learned to gather not only what nature offered in the moment, but to keep and return to it. They noticed that seeds scattered into the soil could sprout again, that plants came back where they had once been picked. What had begun as observation slowly grew into the earliest steps of cultivation, the faint beginning of agriculture. This new relationship with the land changed everything. With food more certain, groups could grow larger. Tribes no longer needed to drift endlessly with the seasons. They could build stronger shelters, return to familiar valleys, and see the same rivers and mountains across generations. Life became a little less fragile, and memory grew deeper. But the shift also brought new struggles. Larger groups meant more mouths to feed, more disputes to settle, and more dangers from rival tribes. The first sparks of cooperation now had to evolve into leadership, rules, and customs. Humanity was no longer shaped only by the hunt and the storm, but by the challenge of living together in ever-growing numbers. In this changing world, Humans were not only survivors, they were becoming creators. They shaped tools with greater precision, crafted shelters with skill, and left symbols on stone and bone that carried meaning beyond survival. The earth itself was transforming, and with it, humanity was taking its first steps toward a destiny far greater than mere endurance. The Ice Age had tested their strength, their courage, and their unity. Now, as the world warmed and new lands opened, humanity stood at the edge of a new chapter, the dawn of society, the first heartbeat of civilization.
As the ice retreated and the world slowly warmed, humans did not yet settle. They remained wanderers, moving across rivers, forests, and grasslands, always chasing the herds and the seasons. Their lives were still fragile, bound to the cycles of nature, but their knowledge had grown. Every step across new land carried the memory of countless generations before them. Hunting became more refined. Groups worked together with greater precision, surrounding prey, driving it into traps, and using the land itself as an ally. They no longer fought only with instinct, but with foresight and cunning. Each successful hunt was not just survival, it was proof of what unity and planning could achieve. Gathering, too, became an art. They learned which roots nourished, which berries poisoned, which plants healed the sick. The forest and the plain became a living book, its pages read by eyes trained through hardship. Fire remained their greatest companion, protecting them from the night, shaping their tools, and cooking the food that kept them strong. But even as they grew wiser, the world reminded them of its dangers. Storms struck without warning. Rivers swelled and swept away the careless. Predators lurked in the shadows, watching for weakness. Death was never far, but humanity had learned to meet it with resilience, with memory, and with ritual. At night, beneath the stars, they gathered around fire. Stories were told, not just of the hunt, but of ancestors, of spirits, of forces unseen yet deeply felt. Symbols painted on caves, carved into bone, carried meaning that reached beyond the present. In these moments, humans were not merely surviving, they were dreaming, imagining, and giving shape to a world larger than themselves. They remained wanderers, children of the land, but they were no longer the same fragile beings who had first faced the ice. Through unity, knowledge, and imagination, they had become something more, resilient, aware, and unbroken. Humanity's journey as hunters and gatherers would endure